these dialogues, and I know some of you have been here for others in the past, began with a grant from the MacArthur Foundation. And it was a small part in their attempt to do for this period of time what the Carnegies had done 100 years ago. Carnegies had built libraries, and the MacArthur Foundation thought that they wanted to support the more contemporary form of literacy, which is the literacy of the moving image art. And we proposed doing a series of dialogues that looked at the craft of the oldest of those art forms, the cinema. We have since found support for this project from the Regis Foundation here in our own community, and we've focused mainly on not what I think most film viewers look at as that arena of creativity, which is what you see on screen, namely the actors, the kind of most visible part of the creative aspect of cinema, but on that part behind the screen or behind the camera, producers, writers, and most especially directors. Over the years, we've been able to acknowledge and in a way celebrate and finally hear from a number of actors turned directors. Our very first program in this series was with Clint Eastwood, who at that moment had done, I think, about 15 or 16 features. He had been directing for 2 decades and was here to talk about yet another new film, a film made right before The Unforgiven. And our moderator that evening is our moderator tonight. We're very, very pleased to have Richard Schickel, distinguished critic from Time magazine, who 6 years later now has a book out on Clint Eastwood, and it'll be coming out in November. But he's also author of the Disney version, wonderful book on D.W. Griffith, and many other volumes. I don't think I need to say very much about our main guest tonight. I think he's really virtually an American icon. But I will say that his extraordinary talents, I think his brilliance both in front of the camera and I think if you get to see the new film behind the camera, are only exceeded by his personal generosity and what in show business is called class. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome here to Minneapolis, to the Walker Arts Center, Richard Schickel and Mr. Tom Hanks.
For some reason today, the following phrase popped into my head, probably because of its utter inappropriateness. It's the famous phrase of D.H. Lawrence in which he describes the American hero as stoic, isolate, and a killer. And but the reason it popped into my head was that Bruce and I had been running through clips that we were thinking of playing for tonight's program and talking about. And one of the things that did become clear to me as we looked at some of what Bruce and I both regarded as the most powerful and interesting scenes that Tom had done, was how many of them had to do with one form or another of isolation. And overcoming it, dealing with it in some way or other. And the fact that the one word that it seems always to be attached to him, likability, a word that I think you have said you would like never to hear again in your life, is a combination of those two qualities, it seems to me, as a critic, that has made Tom Hanks the unique presence that he has become in the movies. The American hero is usually an isolated figure, but he is usually not necessarily maybe righteous. He is not necessarily likable. He is not necessarily somebody that we affectionately identify with, maybe respectfully, maybe fearfully, all of those ways. But I think that's something that is unique in what Tom has brought to the movies. And I think it is something all of us as critics have kind of groped for some phrase that's applicable to him, some comparison that's applicable. At a press conference this afternoon, the names of Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda came up, and once when he was quite a young actor, I compared him very specifically to some stuff that he was doing that in a particular film that reminded me of stuff that Cary Grant had once done in films. But there is this quality that is modern, that is up to date, that is not quite like those other guys that preceded him to the screen. And it's that I think is what has fascinated us and made this a great career, and probably is going to make it a career that will go on a long time. Anyway, one of the things I observed in there is no wood here. One of the things that comes clear when you read profiles and the like of your early life is that it was in some measure, I think, an isolated life. Was it not? That is to say, you moved a great deal. You were a kid who was in and out of new schools on a fairly regular basis. Your family was, as they say, a broken home. I don't know if that phrase is even applicable anymore.
Busted.
Busted in some ways. Does that in some way, first of all, I have observed that an awful lot, a disproportionate number of actors come from homes in which, the father or the mother is missing. And it does seem to me that there may be some need for attention that comes out of that circumstance. That's kind of like a first question to reflect on. And the second one might be, does that isolation creep into your performances in some way, some sense of the fact that many of us in life are perhaps lonelier or less communal than we once were in America, or at least like to think we once were?
What I remember most about growing up at any given date on the calendar from 1956 to about 1993 was a sense of confusion more than anything else. I was confused by what was going on in my own house. My folks divorced in 1961, which was pretty hip stuff to do in 1961. The only people who got divorced were like movie stars. Frank Sinatra got divorced.
Yeah, right.
Nicky Hilton got divorced, things like that. So I did begin moving around an awful lot. It wasn't a destitute lifestyle, and there was always a lot of people around. But the sense of confusion, I think, translated for me into I was the youngest in whatever family I was in, and so there were times when I was home by myself a lot. And I think that if there is any one thing that sort of does in fact sort of like drive my artistic bent in choosing films or relating to characters or being interested in these themes, even if they're just comedies, is usually that combating against loneliness, the sense of loneliness that if you are honestly feeling it when you're 6 years old, it's not an easy thing to grasp. Now, my wife has never felt a lonely day in her life, just because of the nature of who she is and the family atmosphere that she comes from. But it's not a desire. I don't recall being desirous of attention in order to, balance out those feelings of confusion, of loneliness. Really, just what I wanted was, I think, is some degree of engagement with other people. Our house was as dysfunctional as the vast majority of American houses seem to be, especially in years like 1966 and 1972, picked a year. But what I was always wanted to be in was just, in a room full of a bunch of animated people who were doing anything other than arguing with each other, because I'd seen plenty of that. As soon as the argument starts, well, that's time to go off, and it's better to be by yourself then. But I was always just looking for the gang kind of ensemble that a family is supposed to be, or a classroom is supposed to be, or a playground is supposed to be. And then later on, what a theater actually is completely based on. A group of people. Some of them are getting attention, but others are waiting for their moment.
theaters and movie companies are funny, aren't they? They're very intense families that you're not stuck with for life.
Thank God.
I mean, in other words, it's very intense, very loving, very close usually, and then everybody goes their separate ways. And
well, that's very loving for about the first 2 weeks.
Right.
But as soon as you put the books down in the play, you begin to start hating some of those people. Now, intensely, as a matter of fact, really, and having no respect for them or their work or where they came from. You don't want to be like them, and why'd they get that part in the first place? And how come I don't have that part? Because I hate him. I hate her too, and I can't play her part. I understand that, but I can't stand. I should have his role. The ensemble atmosphere of my experience at a place, the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival in Cleveland, which is now the Great Lakes Theater Festival in Cleveland, was a huge realization that I came to, that you could be in with a bunch of people, you could be working with a lot of people, and you did not have to like them, and you didn't even have to respect them for 22 hours of the day. Mm-hmm. But those 2 hours that you were doing the play, there was something that was actually superhuman and very cool that was expected of you. You were supposed to suppress your dislike of them or your distrust of them and do the show with them. And that was the mark of a professional.
And also, I mean, at least out of that confusion, which just doesn't happen in families. It usually just rattles on in a family.
You have no
over
choice.
The decades,
Yes.
But at least.
Hi, Dad.
Yeah. Oh.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Wasn't that bad. But
you could take a haircut.
Yeah, exactly.
How
long is that shower going to be? What are you, a shareholder in the gas company?
But at least for those 2 hours, out of the dysfunction, function came, if it was a good show. And so that's a kind of like a thing that I think can kind of make you go on. It would
give purpose to your day. Then, of course, as soon as the curtain came down, you were making sure you didn't talk too loud about where you're going to go have drinks after the show, because they might hear you, and then they'd show up there too, and you don't want that to happen.
But what was the moment? Well, here you've mentioned that the fight would start and you would slide off into somewhere or other. Did you slide off into movies? I mean, did you slide off into the movie theater down the block, or did you slide off into the movie on television?
I slid off into television. Now, occasionally the movie, certainly often the movie on television, but really television. I knew what time it was by what was on TV. Mm-hmm. I didn't need to watch for a decade, because Love of Life is on. I'm supposed to go to school now. Star Trek is over. Time for dinner. Gunsmoke is on. I have to go to bed now. That was it. And it's actually, if you can look back.
Luckily, you never changed time zones.
That would be very. Pacific Standard Time makes all the sense. And how you people can watch the 10 o'clock news is beyond my comprehension. Johnny Carson is on at 11:30, and that's all there is to it. 10:30, I don't understand. It's actually kind of. You can look back on the television that I grew up certainly watching every moment of every day, and it's kind of like this benevolent kind of like thing we had. A blue light and a choice of only a few things, as opposed to the vast amounts of stuff that you can see right now. But just by that very, very dint that you couldn't choose what you wanted to watch. Really, I mean, you had 3 choices, maybe 4 if you had an independent channel. And I didn't even get channel UHF channels until I was 13, and that opened up a whole world of Japanese animated cartoons that I'd never seen before. Man, I didn't understand Speed Racer the first time around, and I don't get it now. I'm not. Does this chimp talk in the back of this racing car? I don't understand what this is. But the word. I mean, the I mean, the aspect of the way society opened itself up to me for the first time in artistic premise was, with some odd dichotomies that were sandwiched right next to each other. I mean, the first time I did see, some of the great films of all time was on TV, and, I had to get through Mayberry RFD before they were on. Watch Mayberry RFD. Okay, now Stalag 17 is on Channel 44. I'll watch it like that.
Yeah. Did it ever occur to you in some tiny, infinitesimal, subliminal way that those were actors, that was a profession that people obviously took up, that it might be something that you would be interested in?
No, because they were still that they were the icons. I could maybe believe that I could get a job as a disc jockey, something like that. I mean, actually, in high school, that was one of the things that I thought I would aim for, a glamorous career in radio. And thank God I dodged that bullet. That's a tough gig. But no, I wasn't the type who sat there thinking someday that's going to be. I mean, I might as well have yearned to be an astrophysicist or a cardiologist. And
you've probably seen the survey that came out in the last couple of days, in which American parents asked to contemplate jobs for their children, ranked movie star even lower than president.
Wait, they don't want their kids to be a movie star?
In the old days, we wanted our kids to grow up to be president, what have you, President ranks, they'd rather they were a carpenter than either a president or a movie star.
Learn how to use your hands. Man, in some ways, I wish I had some skill with tools, because I still got to call somebody to fix the screen door, so it would have served me well, as a matter of fact.
But it really speaks to the notion that stardom is now something that where people are intruded upon in ways that they were not in the past, that your life is an open book. I think much of this survey was based on that. If you're president now, then they go back through your entire childhood.
Yes, yeah.
If you're a movie star, you can't walk down the street without having trouble, or having a tabloid photographer take your picture in an unflattering position.
Yeah, that happens. I think, though, it's a bag of snakes that somehow you open yourself, because there's movie stars like, they say, for example, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
I have no knowledge of Daniel Day-Lewis other than the movies that he makes.
Sure.
He's an absolute chameleon and a mystery. There's others like that. But sure. I think that in the harsh realities of the commerce of being a movie star, sooner or later you open up some sort of crack in the door, and the next thing you know, you are some degree of fodder, not just for tabloids and stuff that comes and goes, but just that kind of like juggernaut that is movie motion picture marketing, and the thousands of television shows and publications that make their living off of talking about the people who make movies or television shows.
Well, what was the moment? I mean, this was a high school drama class, I think, or something where you said, hey, this is kind of fun.
Yeah,
this is kind of interesting.
That it was
this is something I could do.
There was when you become suddenly cognizant that you can actually make a choice somewhere now, that life isn't this thing that drafts you. That you're going to plumbing school, and you're going to be an engineer. When there was like a choice, I realized that you could decide to do things, and though that could actually become your skill. I knew a guy a kid who I went to 5th and 6th grade with, who said in 5th and 6th grade that he was going to be an architect. And I just thought, you're nuts. You're not going to be an architect. You'll be something else. Well, he's an architect, and it took me a few years to realize that I could say something. Now, I went to high school, the first year I was in high school, I thought there were certain things you had to do. I thought you had to try out for sports, because what Wally Cleaver did on Leave It to Beaver or something like that. All the boys on My Three Sons were always at on the basketball squad or something like that. So I guess I had to too. So I tried to play on the soccer team without ever having played soccer. They needed guys on the team, so I said, hey, I might be able to make that team. And unfortunately, there were about 14 guys on the team who had played soccer for the last 6 years of their life, so I stood around and rooted for them as much as I could on the sidelines. A member of the team, but they never played in a single game. It was very sad. No, didn't play in a single game. I thought there was a law. Doesn't the school system have some kind of bylaw that says you have to let me into a game? No, Tom, you're just that bad. You're going to stay and you're going to root for the team. But I did run track that year because actually I was kind of fast. So I could run the 440 and the mile relay. But they were so cripplingly not fun. I mean, it was not fun. The only day I truly remember from working out for the track team was the day I went over to the pole vault pit and stuffed some of the sponge rubber under my shirt and sort of looked like I had shoulder pads on and went over to where the spring football team was having tryouts and asked the coach if he needed a tight end. That was, and the guys all cracked up and even the coach laughed, and so that's what I remember from my track workouts is sticking sponge rubber under my shirt, pretending.
This is your very first sight gag?
Well, that was my first use of humor in order to crack up a bunch of people I really didn't like. We had a very vibrant high school drama department that did a play in the autumn and a musical in the spring. And my sophomore year, which in California was my first year of high school, they have 3-year high schools there, the fall play was Dracula that had a bunch of my friends in it, and I just saw that and I thought, I wish I was up there. I wish I was doing this. How do you do this? And the next year, I enrolled in drama class, and we actually had a classroom that had a small stage with a curtain at the front of it. And my drama teacher, who's now the world-renowned Raleigh T. Farnsworth, the man I outed in front of 3 billion people at the Academy Awards, he was, he just loved the theater and he loved plays, and he didn't hate us kids, so it worked out pretty well. But I tried out for. The first role I got was Jake Latta in Night of the Iguana. Now, what a high school is doing Night of the Iguana?
Perhaps Raleigh T. Farnsworth deserves his accolades.
He really liked to direct. He liked to design and build the set, and everything else was essentially the high school play. But it was a great cabana with palm fronds and a hammock and the whole bit. And Jake Latta is the guy who comes from the tour company in the second act, I believe, who takes the tour away from the Reverend, defrocked Reverend Shannon, and then the play really begins. It's a part of such distinction that it was, when the movie played late at night at 1 o'clock in the morning in about 1971, we all gathered at my house, the cast of this high school production, to watch it, and my part was the only one that had been cut from the movie. The guy who was the bus driver took the thing away, and so there was no Jake Latta in the thing. But I remember being there was it's humble beginnings, folks. It's requisite for every movie star. I remember distinctly the feeling of the 3 days of auditions that Mr. Farnsworth held. There were 2 days of general readings, and Friday was the callbacks. And it was 2 hours from 3 to 5 of incredible nervous anticipation. We were all seated down in the theater just like this. We'd have to come up on the stage and read the scenes as we were doing. And he mixed and matched characters and actors and actresses, and did that for 3 days and was called back on Friday, and so did some more. And then that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, truly, I had an anxiety that I honestly had never had before anywhere else in my existence. It was that exciting. I was going to find out on Monday morning whether I had been cast in Night of the Iguana. And Monday morning, you're riding the bus to school and the heart is beating. Is my name going to be on the paper? Is my name going to be there? Now, Raleigh Farnsworth, he was the first person I ever knew who typed on a typewriter that had pica type, it was like every letter was like italicized, so it was hard to read. Because it's like a bunch of squiggles and stuff, so you really had to get in there close. And I remember it was that blue mimeographed paper, that smell. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, you're showing your roots. And Jake Latta is pretty far down the cast list, but nonetheless, there it was, Jake Latta. I spelled my name Thom back then, and it said Tom Hanks, and I was thrilled. Now, honestly, Jake Latta has like maybe 16 lines in the entire thing, but man, it was fun.
And did you say, after Jake Latta, life after Jake that's it? You said the die is cast. I will be an actor.
It was. It was a brand of fun that I didn't know existed anywhere. It was such an incredibly intense place to go. It just beat the crap out of the track team. It was just, everybody was vibrant and alive, and there were chicks there, there were girls, and it was like, it was always this hubbub of activity, and I realized, I honestly thought that was the most fun that I ever had. And, at the age of 15, to suffer a crushing post-creative depression because, your role of Jake Latta in Night of the Iguana is over. It took at least 10 days, Richard, in order for me to come out of my alcoholic stupor. I was so depressed. But it immediately gave me a taste to want to do it again. And I was the stage manager for My Fair Lady of the Spring Musical, and the next year, I did like one-act plays in the high school department, and the next year I was just an acting maniac. I did it all I can, but I still didn't think in high school that was something that you could actually pursue somehow. I thought still, eventually, I would have to become an insurance salesman or work at a hotel or something like that. I thought that someone was going to say, "Hey, wait a minute now." And it wasn't until I was in my second year of junior college that I even tried out for another show.
Really?
Yeah, yes.
What did you think you were doing, Tom, in that interim?
Well, I had this is why I thought I was doing all the responsible things that you're supposed to do. I was going to junior college. I actually sent my SAT scores to 3 institutions of higher learning. I sent one to Villanova. Because you get 3. You can send 3 free ones for them to take the SAT scores. Well, what do you want? Villanova. I was hoping they'd send me a sticker or something like that. Thank you for your application. Here's a sticker. You're not getting in. I sent one to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Because, we're just trying to crack everybody up. Well, where are you? I'm going to send one to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I sent one to Chabot Junior College in Hayward, California. That's where I went, and they accepted me with open arms. And I thought what I was doing there, I thought, well, you know what? I'll go to junior college and I will take all of the those courses that are required of you. Your ology courses, your zoology and biology and sociology and ology, the study of studying things, ology. And I truly just bided my time, bored out of my skull with being a college student. There's this line in that Laurence Olivier says to Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man, as Dustin Hoffman is being tortured, how I envy you your college days, the one time in your life when truly nothing is expected of you. And, that's what I was reveling in. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to college. And it wasn't until much later in that I ran into an old friend of mine from high school, and he said, "Why aren't you trying out for plays?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "Shame on you." He literally said, "Shame on you. You should be doing plays." And I auditioned for Our Town. I had a job then at the Oakland Hilton Hotel as a bellboy, which is a fabulous job because you get tips. You got cash in your pocket all the time. And I was taking drama classes at the same time, but I was just taking those for fun, just because.
But you weren't going out for plays.
No, I was not. I didn't really think you could work that into your life.
Yeah.
I thought there was some other responsible thing you had to do in lieu of having that fun.
What? So I can stay on this early Tom Hanks for a long time.
Oh, it's fascinating
But
stuff, Richard. Can you believe it,
We
folks?
have this long...
The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. If I still went to McAllister College, I probably could have gotten in. You know?
Well,
It's the only reference I have.
listen, pal,
Is there a local reference I can throw out that'll make you all
I'll
laugh?
tell you something. It's the only college that ever let me be a visiting professor.
Oh, well. Let's hear the groan now, folks. Oh.
But what professionalized this? That, I mean, let's skip ahead. to
Please,
that.
let's do.
Get on to early TV, first movies.
Okay,
that sort
all
of
right.
thing.
Well, I ended up going to the Sacramento State University and actually studying theater arts when I realized you could make that choice. And all I did was study theater arts. I learned how to build sets and stage manage shows and whatnot. And because I was not cast in a show there, all my friends got cast in Joe Orton's What the Butler Saw. I was not. So I had to go to this regional kind of little theater downtown in Sacramento, and I was cast by Vincent Dowling of the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival to play Yasha in The Cherry Orchard, the supercilious servant. That's what the review said about me. Right? I was a supercilious servant, Yasha. If I had gone to McAllister College, I would have known what supercilious meant, but of course I couldn't get in.
As it was, you thought that was a rave, right?
Yeah, I did. Hey, that's pretty good notice. But anyway, I ended up, because Vincent had a theater that he was trying to turn profitable, he had a program that he called the Intern Program, which was essentially, 50 slave laborers who were unpaid, who, because they got to work with bona fide professionals, were viewed it as a great opportunity. And it just so happened that it was the opportunity that ended up getting me into the Actors Equity Union, because they didn't have enough equity cast members to fill out a show of Taming of the Shrew. So I was able to play Grumio in that, and that got me into the union, and that got me 3 years of work with the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. And in the middle of that, most of the actors were there from New York, and they said, listen, if you have a card in your wallet that says you're a professional, you can't go back to Sacramento, California. You've got to go to a place like either New York. I had a friend, actually, Clive Rosengren, who was from Minneapolis, and he said, hey, man, there's a lot of stuff going up there at the Cricket Theater and the Chanhassen Dinner Theater and the Guthrie. But he was the only guy from Minnesota, and there were like 8 people from New York, so I ended up going to New York.
Were you funny in these roles? I mean,
Yes.
Did you? I mean,
I was supercilious, Richard.
what I meant to say was, were you intentionally funny? No. What I meant to say was, were you being cast in comedic roles?
Oh, yes.
Primarily?
Well, there's not many funny spear carriers, and I did a lot of that. Just kind of stand there. As soon as that play is over, you lift up, Claudius's throne and carry it out. That's pretty much what I was doing for some of the shows. Yes, but the nature of the thing that I had really always kind of been in school was loud and louder, and that paid off when you were auditioning for something like Grumio, the supercilious servant of Petruchio. And yeah, I got gigs. I was cast in roles that were primarily comedic, and for some reason I played Rinaldo in Hamlet. Rinaldo is a role that's almost always cut from Hamlet, and honestly, for good reason. He comes out and has a little scene with Polonius, then Polonius sends him out to spy on Laertes. Unless you want to do a 4-hour Hamlet, there's no reason to have Rinaldo in there. But and I tried to pump as much humor into him as I could. But, man, they just sat there stone-faced.
What? The early television and so forth, to be honest with you, I never saw that series.
Bosom
that
Buddies?
Beloved series that you were on. Hey. I was always out at night going to the movies, and so I actually didn't. But
Oh, I thought you were just watching Magnum P.I.
no,
It was on opposite us, you see.
right. But that was a kind of like you went to New York and they found you and you did that.
If I had known what was going on in that process, I would have probably become nervous and blown it. I just kept going to these minute-and-a-half meetings with people in some office somewhere in Midtown Manhattan. And I would do whatever they'd say. Take your glasses on. Okay, put them off. Okay, read this. Hold this up. Spin around. Bark like a dog. Say moo. I'd do anything. I'd do anything they asked me to do. And the next thing I know, I am flying first class for the very first time on an airplane to Los Angeles to test for a bunch of that season's TV pilots. I tested for the TV version of Breaking Away and didn't get it. I tested for the TV version of, what was the Chevy Chase, Goldie Hawn movie, Foul Play. I tested for some show called Blue Jeans about a rock and roll band. I actually kind of learned how to sandbag the audition for that one because I didn't want to do the role. If they gave me that job, I didn't want to have it. And I auditioned for Bosom Buddies and was actually cast in that. I was part of a Joyce Selznick, the casting office, and a relation of the famous Selznick family, although not a close one, was in charge of this thing called the ABC Talent Development Program, in which she would go off for, once a year and cover Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and sign promising newcomers to exclusive contracts to ABC. And out of that fabulous talented pool of people would be their new members of a lot of their new television shows. And I was in a group that included Al Corley, John James, who ended up being on Dynasty, Ann Gillian, who did her television series, Donna Dixon, myself, and I was on Bosom Buddies.
How did you feel about yourself as an actor then?
I had no concept of myself as an actor in any way, shape, or form. I was still operating on the loud or louder school of auditioning. My audition piece for classical Shakespeare companies was a farce from Beyond the Fringe, the Peter Cook and Doug Moore thing, which was a bunch of Shakespearean gibberish. Yeah. Because I knew that everybody who had gone in before me was either doing the bastard speech from King Lear, or now is the time for something from Richard III. So these poor casting people had to sit through bastards, bastardy up for bastards, that kind of stuff, and they were just bored out of their heads. And then
you came in and
I would walk in and I would do a little comedy, and they loved me to death. Not that they gave me the job, but they said, "We want to thank you so much."
Had you, in these New York years, had you done any kind of earnest acting studies as you've gone to Herbert and Uta and all that crowd, or had you not done that sort of thing? I didn't do it simply for the reason that if they had told me I was bad or worthless, I would have believed them, and it would have been bone crushing. They had the Theater Guild, I believe, what was it called? TCG, Theater Communications Guild. You could go down there and audition, and they would sort of pipeline you out to theaters all over the place, and I wouldn't go because they had to like you. They had to think you did a good audition piece before you had literally passed their muster. They had open auditions still at the Public Theater down in Lafayette Square. And I would not go down and audition for them because if I didn't get it, it would have broken me. And also, I didn't really have the greatest amount of confidence in my chops at that point because really, I only had, honest to God, maybe 6 credits on my resume, and only 3 of those were real. So the others were lies. I actually told these people I could juggle and play the guitar, and I could not. I could do neither. I couldn't juggle or play the guitar. What are the odds of them asking me? I always thought. By the time I got out by the time I was cast in Bosom Buddies, if you look, as you all study the early episodes of Bosom Buddies, I believe the kinescopes are still available. On sale in the lobby.
Yeah, on sale in the lobby. $28.95 a piece. All I do is I shout so loud. My parrot! Where's my parrot, Modigliani? Henry, what are we going to do? That's the way every line, I think I'll have the tuna salad sandwich. That's the way I delivered every line. I was just shouting. Because when you get the job in television, they think you know what you're doing. So no one said to me, look, this is TV, the microphone's right there. You don't have to yell. Nobody said that to me. So I was still thinking, well, this is what I did in Cleveland as Grumio. And it was only through the pain of watching myself Thursday nights at 8:30 following Mark and Mindy with a handful of other Americans, because they were watching Magnum P.I. with Tom Selleck, which premiered the same year we did, but he was on the cover of TV Guide long before his show was even on the air. That's when I realized, no, I'm really doing something horribly, terribly wrong. And that first year of Bosom Buddies was I actually did kind of spend examining this thing called acting for a camera. And it looks horrible because it's on videotape. Most television series were done on film, but we did 4-camera videotaped show, and the lighting is bad, and then the hair is huge, and and I look like a big Stockard Channing in drag, and it was. And I'm living in a horrible house, somewhere in the valley, and I don't have a car. I mean, it was an incredibly educational process. That was also at the same time big time show business. It was an odd dichotomy to be in.
Did that really, other than teaching you not to shout when it was inappropriate, did that make you an actor?
Yes, it did.
2 years of every week going in and doing it?
Because it was acting with a gun held to your head. Because Peter and I, Peter Scolari, the other bosom buddy, or the left bosom, I'm not sure which one. Maybe I was the right bosom. He and I became so tight in the course of making this that we actually had this kind of strange Gestalt communication. We were only guys on the show. All the girls had their dressing rooms way on the other side of the stage. And so he and I would lean in each other's doorways, and ponder the universe and our work, stuff like, man, those cats in Chicago at that place, Steppenwolf Theater, they're doing it right, man. They're doing great stuff. And here we are trying to figure out how to shoot an episode called Hildy's Dirt Nap. But we wrestled with our craft there. Peter was from the Colonnades Theater Lab in New York, and we really did wrestle with it. We felt so inferior because just 2 stages down they were shooting Taxi, and the stage across the street, Robin Williams, was still a nationwide phenomenon. And farther on down, Henry Winkler was in his 14th season of being Fonzie. How long can that guy live above a garage? We never understood, but. And still be the toughest teenager in all of Milwaukee. I never quite understood that. But the second season of the television show, he and I, both at the same time, really did try to perfect these someone never told us this, but we realized through osmosis that less was more. And that we, as the actors, had to combat the demands of the script, the demands of the producers, to always make it louder or funnier or faster or choppier or whatever it was. And we were always trying to do these incredibly small and subtle things. And in the second season, if you remember the hit television show Bosom Buddies, there was one episode where it was just me, Peter and myself in a log cabin, snowbound up in the woods, and it was one of the first times the two of us. It might have been the only time. It was just he and I in the episode together. We were separated from the rest of the ensemble, so it was literally a 2-person play between these 2 guys who could finish each other's sentences. And the good news is that right about that point, I think both of us figured out how to do it. The bad news was we only had 3 episodes remaining till our show was canceled. So we're a little late to the process, but we finally figured it out.
Because we have all these clips to play, we have to make a quick jump.
I thought we were going to start with the pilot of Bosom Buddies and then go to the second episode of Bosom Buddies.
Well, that was the original plan.
We have disappointed hundreds of people, Richard.
You keep giving these long answers to these questions.
Sorry. I'm still fascinated with my Horatio Alger story.
But obviously we're going to, well, not so obviously, but why not? We're going to start with Splash.
I think we should.
And
thank God for Splash. Oh, please. No, please. Thank you.
How'd you get that job?
I got this job because no one else would take it. There was an A list of actors at the time that was cast in 1983. I essentially spent a year unemployed in Los Angeles, not a good place to be. But I had done one guest spot on Happy Days, and the guys who wrote Splash, Lowell Gans and Bob Lou Mandel, were still like executive producers of Happy Days or something like that. Excuse me. And Ron Howard, little Opie Cunningham, Ron Eat My Dust Howard, Ron the Smith Family Howard, was going to direct this pretty much big budget mainstream Hollywood motion picture for the Disney studios. The A-list actors at the time, which consisted of people, I don't know, like Dudley Moore, Richard Dreyfuss, Elliot Gould, whoever was on the Richard Gere, there was just no way they were going to make a Little Mermaid movie with Opie Cunningham. It just wasn't going to happen. You know, I guess they had seen the Boatniks and figured that it was like it was a thing. And so I got to go into this, I met Brian Grazer, the producer, for the first time. And it was also one of the first times that the producer was about my age. He was a young guy. And Ron we were all essentially, all peers. And they were just trying to get this thing made. And I went in actually thinking that I was reading for what became the John Candy role. I had no attention or track record or anything that would warrant me going in to read for the lead. But I just talked with him for a while, and Brian Grazer, and then I talked to Ron, and then I went home thinking that, well, I guess that's it. And I had the sides. I was prepared to read for the role of the wacky brother, but they didn't ask me to, so I was actually kind of bummed out. But then Ron called me back and said, listen, I'd like you to come in and read, but I'd like you to read for the lead, the Alan guy, Alan Bauer, I guess that, Alan Bauer, is that his name? Alan Bauer. Well, all right, fine. And because they were young guys, I wasn't intimidated by them. It's not like every other audition process felt like you were going to the bank to ask for a loan or something. Some old guy in the back, thank you very much. No, you don't get it. But this was like just kind of go off and goof around and play. So I read. He videotaped me on, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 scenes, maybe 5 scenes. And it was easy, and I just rattled it off. And he called me up the next day and said, listen, first of all, you got the part. Secondly, I'd really like this actress, Daryl Hannah, to play Madison, but the studio's giving me some trouble. So can you come in and do it? I'd like to do a film test with you and her in order to cement the job for her. And I said, what? All I heard was you got the part, and the rest was the head was spinning, and it was that ludicrously easy.
Wow. Well, we're going to play.
Please, let's see a clip.
Enough
of the Tom and Richard show.
Anyway, I don't think we need to explain this clip.
I don't even know what clip it is.
If we do, we can do it afterwards.
All right. Very good. Which one was me? I don't.
See what I mean? It is, I think, hey, your guy who ends up with a mermaid. It's not normal. It's a little outsider-ish. It's a little odd, yes. And
a guy that has something wrong inside.
Right.
Yes.
That's my thesis.
Well, it's a good one.
But anyway, anything more to be said about that? Work on it. John Candy.
Well, John was one of the most miraculous human beings on the planet. Really, that's John. The John in real life was exactly like that, in the best of all possible ways. He was a great instigator and an organizer. He was like that to everybody he met, perhaps to a fault. I mean, he was talking to strangers on the street like that sometimes. But he's a very big-hearted guy.
There followed in this after the hit of Splash.
Yeah.
There followed a period where you did Volunteers, The Money Pit, and Turner and Hooch and whatnot. These were extremely.
No applause for those.
Well,
They can't all be hits, you know.
well, I went and I hauled out my reviews, and I gave you 3 in a row good reviews
Oh, is that right?
on those movies. Yeah, because
I know.
I thought they were funny. I thought particularly Volunteers, the character you played in that, was hilarious. That kind of honking wasp from Yale.
Darien, Connecticut.
From
yes.
Yale, who ends
Lawrence
up,
Bourne III.
yeah.
Lawrence Bourne III.
And then, of course, I always like dog movies.
Actually, Turner Hooch was there's some good stuff in Turner
There's some
Hooch.
damn good stuff in it. What I'm getting at is that despite their relative,
Dog lovers.
I think these were all actually, in commercial terms, successful movies.
Yes, they were. This is the weird thing. Yes,
Yeah.
they were.
Which is sort of, no, it's not weird. They're not bad movies, you know.
They all.
Didn't they do something for you in a certain sense? I think every actor who is going to have a substantial career. It needs a period of time when it doesn't make that much. I mean, he shouldn't be in horrible movies, but he needs a time for the public to kind of take stock of him, to take him in a little bit, to get past that first, oh wow, he was terrific in Splash or whatever, and become somebody that you, what should you say, get used to in a pleasant way. I have a feeling that movies like that make it possible for you to go on and do quite a different kind of movie, and if you hadn't had those movies, maybe that wouldn't be true.
I think it's absolutely true. At the time, it was such an educational process, not just about how it is to make a movie, but what you have to go through as the performer in that movie in order to somehow tell the truth on any given day that you're shooting. What was great about it, this is the riff, and actually it's in your programs, but which do cost $1 a piece. I made Bachelor Part, and I made these movies almost back to back. I had very little time in between them because at that point I didn't realize that you could say no to anything. And look, hey, they're asking me, I better do it because they're going to stop asking me sooner or later. So there was Bachelor Party and The Man with One Red Shoe and Volunteers, and I can remember this era of filmmaking easy because everything was so new to me and the images were so clear. Volunteers, The Money Pit, Nothing in Common. I essentially made those 5 movies pretty much back to back. And in doing so, I learned how to be a filmmaker. I learned how to drive to the soundstage or the location every day and slowly put everything that was honestly going on in my life behind me, so when the time came, I could stand up in front of the camera and be charming or witty or sad or whatever was required. And I was able to learn how to do that without ever using an artificial stimulus for doing it. I wasn't tricking myself into doing that. I was actually learning how to take the mental steps and the actor's preparatory steps in order.
The kind of stuff they actually, had you gone to a proper drama class,
I might have
they would have
learned,
probably
yeah.
taught you how as Stanislavski, an actor prepares. They would have taught you how to do that. You'd have learned it on your own driving down the 405.
Exactly, and by myself because I wasn't a big enough star to have a driver yet. You know? But once again, for all those movies, it was an educational process for me, and yet it was big time show business because before my very eyes, and much to my amazement, I had become something of a bankable movie star for a certain type of movie in an atmosphere that was supposedly, cutthroat and vicious and incredibly dangerous, but I had no idea because they just kept asking me to make movies. And so I did.
Did you have a kind of, again, possibly out of a childhood where you were a little bit economically, did you disarrange? Did you feel like, this is my shot, I've got to have it, I better take every job that comes along and put the money in the bank and against...
You bet. I had long philosophical discussions with friends of mine of how what you do is you never buy anything unless you can pay cash. Because if you have to make payments on it, your nut is going to improve. And I looked at every movie as buying me, this now buys me another 3 years of independence. So when it all comes down and it stops, I'll be able to live for 3 years without having my house taken away from me.
Yeah.
That's the way I thought.
It is uncanny to me how much in common all actors' stories are. I mean, the details are different, but the emotions moving people, at these stages of their lives. I just finished writing a biography of quite a different kind of movie star, and this
Michael Keaton?
this unnamed movie star said to me, he said, "I didn't feel secure until I'd done Dirty Harry." Well, man, he'd been a star for a decade by that time.
I wonder who he's talking about. But yes,
the point being that it takes that long to say, well, maybe I'll get another job.
Yeah.
But was there a restiveness, because we're going to come up now on 2 more movies, but the one you shot before the more famous of them? Were you saying to yourself, I got to do something besides these bourgeois comedies? I got to do something. Yeah. They're going to get tired of this, or I'm tired of it, or whatever was going on. What was going on as you headed up toward our next clip, which will be Punchline? Not yet. What were you saying? I got to get something edgier. Got to get something. Whatever.
I was trying with every job to, as a hedge against the future, to expand whatever horizon, whatever spectrum I was being accepted in. I was a light comedian. I was a leading man in kind of romantic comedies. And what I was always trying to do is have some aspect of either the theme of the movie or the character, just to bolster that a little bit, so we just get into some other colors, just so there was something else that I could do. In Volunteers, I was trying to do like a full-on character with a different voice and like that. In the Money Pit, it was a huge, big-budget special effects movie.
Yeah, but you're also playing a lot of wonderful kind of desperation in that. I mean, that to me is I think where I made the Cary Grant remark.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Now
because
I do recall.
It was about that kind of fuming.
A lot of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yes. Which he did awfully well.
He used to do, and then he'd whinny like a horse. That was one of his good comic tricks.
With a movie called Nothing in Common that Gary Marshall directed and I made with Jackie. Jackie Gleason played my dad, and Eva Marie Saint played my mom. That was truly the first time where I actually said to the director, "Look, I'd like to do. Let's go all the way on this. Demand something more of me, so that this story of the father and the son would be much more serious." That was the first time I thought that I knew enough about the movie-making process to ask to be invited to the filmmaking process with the director and the writer, saying, "No, I think this should be different or better, or this shouldn't be here at all." But then, what I'm trying to think now, you guys
pushing up toward Punchline.
Punchline. Then I'm trying to remember what I did. Nothing in Common. Then I made "Oh Mailman in the Desert," Every Time We Say Goodbye. I think I made Dragnet there somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Dragnet. Then did I make Turner and Hooch? I can't recall.
Yeah, I think Turner and Hooch actually.
No. That was later on. So when Punchline was around, this was funny studio politics. I had a deal at Columbia. They used to do these things where they would say, "Hey, you should develop movies for us. You're an actor. You're smart. You should develop movies for us." And then they give you an office, and they give you a secretary, and they give you a phone that you can make all the long-distance phone calls you want to with, and that's really why you go to the office, just to call, "Hey, I have a friend in Hawaii, I can call him." And I was supposed to develop. I didn't know how to develop movies. I didn't have an original idea in my head, but they wanted to give me an office, so I took it. Punchline was a film that was there at Columbia that Sally Field was very interested in, and at first the studio said, "We already have Sally Field in this movie. We want a Sally Field movie and a Tom Hanks movie. We don't want a Sally Field, Tom Hanks movie. We want 2 different movies. So therefore you cannot do Punchline." Then that regime all got beheaded in the public beheading that they have there around the Pacific Design Center in Los Angeles, a big square. There's a guillotine, and all the agents show up and applaud. And then David Putnam took over Columbia Studio for the beginning of his brief tenure, and he and I had dinner at the Bel Air Hotel, and I was so scared. I didn't even know where the Bel Air Hotel was then, even still. And here I was meeting a guy who was going to be running the studio. And he said, "Tom, what do you think about your work?" And I said to him what I just said to you. Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm always trying to expand the horizon of what's expected of me as an actor, so that's the only way I can grow. And so I know I'm doing comedies with a capital C, but there's some other things in there that I try to do different. And he looked at me and says, "Well, that works in theory, but I don't think you're really doing it. I think you have to make a bolder choice." And I said, "Well, I'd love to, but I got to operate with what's coming down the pike." And he said, "Well, why don't you want to do Punchline?" And I said, I was told I couldn't do Punchline. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, the last guy's there. I said, Sally Field movie, Tom Hanks movie. I don't want a Sally Field, Tom Hanks movie." And David Putnam went like this. "That's just the kind of thing that I'm trying to bring a halt to." And the next thing I was doing was I was having a meeting with David Seltzer, who wrote and directed it, and not long after that I had a meeting with Sally Field, who was actually attached as one of the producers, and I ended up getting the job.
The scene we have here, I'll let you maybe set it up a little bit. It's the singing in the rain.
Oh, okay. The character of Stephen Gold is a stand-up comedian who is probably the most... he is unredeemable. He is an unredeemable human being. He is. I always viewed him as being that kind of refuse that washes ashore in places like Venice, California. He is. This is what I said when I was having a meeting. I said, "Look, I know guys like this." And what's heartbreaking about them to me is that they only feel truly alive for those moments when they're doing their stand-up comedy, because they get to be despots up there. The world operates at their own speed. They stay up as long as they want, and they make the audience laugh, provided they're good, of course. And at that time, they feel such incredible rages of power that it screws them up for real life. As soon as they get off, they are not that person anymore, and they literally can't deal with life as we know it. That is the case with countless stand-up comedians. If you do it too long, you become a hideous human being. And I thought that this was a guy who, at the age of 25 or 26, was well on his way to being one of the saddest human beings on the face of the planet, and that's the way I played him. And in this case, he has this ridiculous love infatuation with a woman who's much older than him, who is married, lives in New Jersey. And he actually thinks that, deluded by this power of his life as a comedian, he thinks he can convince her actually to run away with him.
I think that's a great scene. I really do. How much was that worked out? I mean, how did you work it out? Was that largely directorial? Was it largely you? Was it?
It was all me.
It was all you, of course.
David Seltzer had said early when we were, in rehearsal, said, "Would you like to? I'll bring in a mime and a choreographer, and we can plan something for that." And I said, "Get out of here! I've seen the movie. It's all right. I'll come up with something." And so that was what we did.
Really?
Yeah.
That's remarkable, because there's some wonderful beats in there.
It was, this was the most important movie in my career, actually. Punchline was. This was the first time that I openly said I would like to do this. I declared my intentions prior to taking the job. And even though the movie, it wasn't a huge, massive success, and there's a lot of fake moments in it as far as its examination of the world of the stand-up comedian. It is the first time I saw the movie and said, I don't know who that guy is. That was the first time I stopped thinking about the specifics of what I wanted to do and just went along with the instinctive thrust of what I had been thinking about.
And yet, having just said that, I have also read, I think an interview you gave out at the time, that you thought there was more of yourself in this part than there had been in some of the other parts. Now, can you put that together with what you've just said?
Yeah, because it's a thin line between control and chaos. And when you're dealing with the incredible personal sensations of either acceptance or rejection from utter strangers, if you give in to the self-loathing that goes along with putting yourself in that place to begin with, I mean, what kind of pathetic human being does this and either makes a living at it or feels good about himself by
do you
pursuing
extend
it?
that beyond stand-up comics to all persons who perform?
There's a poem about the tightrope walker that an actor is, that every night he steps out on that little wire, and is he going to fall? And why is the audience there? Are they there to see him successfully walk across the wire, or are they there on the odd chance that he's going to fall down and kill himself? Which is it? And I think that for myself as a human being, it's a constant battle to make sure that you don't fall down, because once you do, man, it's very hard to get back up there again.
So you think all actors, even no matter how much success they pile up in life and all that, they can never fully relax, can never fully say, well, I got it made now.
I don't think
They'll turn against me like mad dogs.
None that I have come across
really
feel any other way. That it's all just a matter of time.
It's interesting that you made Punchline and Big back to back.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess Big was made after Punchline, but Punchline came out before it.
We made Punchline in the winter and spring of '87, and that scene was actually shot in February at 125th Street in Manhattan. It was freezing cold, and they had rain machines on top of it. It was miserable.
But Big is I suppose in most people's eyes would be the antithesis. Is the antithesis of Punchline. But Big is also, for an actor, kind of a remarkable thing to attempt, isn't it?
Go ahead.
Well, just the notion of playing a 13-year-old, a 13-year-old mind is, I think, seems to me a big challenge, difficult to do. Is it harder to do, radical innocence than it is to do radical shittiness? Or
It is the easiest thing in the world. Doing Big. It was the easiest.
Really?
It was the simplest yes to say, because the screenplay was so good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was all right there. I got together with Penny Marshall when we were actually honestly talking about doing it, and I said, I get this. I think I understand this. It's about this kid. We had a discussion. Actually, it was this moment. We were trying. Penny and I didn't know each other very well. Then we're trying to size each other up and feel each other out there. And is she going to really let me go with the instincts here, or what's the deal? And we had a discussion about this scenes in when Josh is in the office. Now, there had been a couple of other movies out at the same time that had the same kind of theme. A kid is really a man, or a man is really a kid, something like that. We were going to be like the fourth movie in that whole narrow genre that came out within 5 weeks of each other or something. And more often than not, they had scenes where the adult who is actually a kid is in an office. And in some of these movies, the kid was marveling that he could spin around in the chair. And he looked down and would spin in his chair. As in, oh, this chair spins. Isn't this fun? And we both knew that is such a horseshit moment, pardon my language, but I just heard myself say fuck in the screen. We both knew that kids are not going to be interested in a chair that spins, because they've sat in chairs that spin.
Right.
They're going to be fascinated by this cool telephone that's got a bunch of buttons on it. Mm-hmm. That they're going to pick up and say, hello, who's there? Hello, hello, hello. That's what they're going to do. And when we both realized that we were talking about that same thrust towards how to display the behavior and therefore explain the character, well, then it was pretty much a done deal.
The scene we have here is a scene in which, talking about sort of, again, loneliness. This is the moment where he comes to the big city.
Oh, Lord,
with
yes.
his little pal. And again, to me, it fits this notion of a person who is trying kind of bravely, as so often happens happens in a lot of your movies, trying bravely to pretend he's with it and can handle it, and man, he can. So here's a scene from Big. Have any moments in life like that?
Yeah, they all got worked out right there that day of shooting, as a sad and lonely little boy.
So how do you play a little boy if you're a grown-up guy? I mean, do you just remember, or do you, or is he always in there for us to tap into?
Well, we're all child deep inside, aren't we? We're all children. There was certainly a beginning of that, but I did do stuff in preparation for that was kind of odd, you know. I watched my own kids. My oldest son was only, I think he was 8 at that time, so I observed him quite a bit, and like in a cheesy kind of fashion. But there's a spirit of play that I honestly worked on developing prior to that, that I could do just at my driveway playing basketball and having the same sort of imaginary basketball games in my head like I did when I was 8 years old and stuff like that.
Were you the announcer?
I was
Hanks drives for the boards.
I was everything. I was the kid on the team that shouldn't be playing. I was the man who could never miss a three-pointer. I was the coach. I was the announcer, and I was also an amazed fan all at the same time. I did it all, and it was all by myself. You know, literally for hours in the backyard, just trying to develop that.
I think a lot of actors, maybe the first acting they do is for an audience of one, which is themselves, because they are kind of lonesome and they're kind of wandering through the fields if they're farm kids and there's nobody around to play with, or they're the new kid on the block and none of the kids in the new school are speaking to them. And I think I have an impression, again, from talking to actors through life, that a lot of actors begin in that way, that kind of imagining characters for themselves.
The backyard on a sunny day.
There's some truth in that?
Oh, absolutely. The backyard on a sunny day, I distinctly remember running for hours. I'd just nailed a sheet to a stick and it became a flag. And so suddenly I was Johnny Tremaine, or, you know, the little drummer boy, or fighting the Battle of Gettysburg in the bamboo, you know, field back behind our house. Or I would stick a brick in the back of my bathing suit and lay at the bottom of our doughboy pool, sucking air through a garden hose that was running up to the top of the pool, and I was an astronaut on a spacewalk. I could honestly keep myself entertained for hours and not break a single law.
Big is a movie that I think made, and I think this happens again in many star careers. There's the movie that makes people notice you, and then there's the movie that establishes you like forever. I mean, oh, he's really a movie star now. And it seems to me Big is that movie in your career.
Yes, it is.
That's the one where after that there could be really no doubts, no nothing. I mean, probably doubts on your part, but no doubts in the larger audience's mind that this was a presence and this was a figure. Do you think that's true?
Well, everything that happened that was connected to that movie was I mean, incrementally so much huger than anything else that had ever happened. I mean, I was nominated for an Academy Award, and, you know, I lost to Dustin Hoffman that year for Rain Man, but still, the first time you get that kind of attention and exposure for this thing that you just did quite naturally, after that, I was something different.
Did it go to your head?
You know what? It probably did for a while. In all honesty, I don't. You know, I remember I won a Golden Globe Award. You know, because they give out awards for, you know, they split it between comedy and drama or something like that. So I won, you know, best performance in a comedy. It's like I had this trophy, and I must, you know, for a while, you know, I guess I was anticipating a parade in my honor down Sunset Boulevard or something like that. Yes, I'm here. Can you believe it? And when that happened, I was actually making Turner and Hooch. When I was nominated, it was actually during Turner and Hooch. And I think that there was some aspect of, hey, I know what I'm doing. You know, hey, don't tell me. I know what I'm doing. Come on, let's just do it. I know what I'm doing. You get a degree of carte blanche on that for a while, but then if you're smart, you realize that you thought you knew what you were doing, but it stinks to high heaven what you tried, and then you realize that you don't know a thing, man. You just get out there and please the director.
We're going from Big to another Penny Marshall movie where you're playing somebody considerably older than yourself.
So let me get this straight. We're not going to see clips from The Burbs.
No.
No Joe versus a volcano.
I believe I have actually confessed to you that I think Joe and Volcano is at least 2/3 of a terrific movie.
It is a brilliant movie. It is a brilliant movie for 80 minutes, or maybe 55 minutes.
Yeah.
It is. The first two parts of that are unlike anything I had ever seen or have seen since.
To me, in a funny way, that's a movie where I started thinking, this is somebody to be reckoned with, because that opening, the whole business is where you're playing this actually surreal comedy.
Yeah.
And the whole business of, I don't think anybody in America saw this movie except, me and you.
And Sylvia Drake of the LA Times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And a handful of folks.
But
who chose not to watch Magnum P.I., which was still on the air at the time that we made it. So who had the last lie? I have to say that.
Talk about that. Even though we haven't got a clip, that movie, something drew you to it that was different from Big and different from...
We don't have the clip, but here's what it was. There was a moment in that movie where Joe Banks stands up on a raft made of floating suitcases in the middle of the Pacific, watches a full moon rise above the horizon, gets down on his knees, and thanks God for his life. And then the last thing he says is, "I never knew it was so big." And then he falls over unconscious. That, to me, was a moment to kill for as an actor in a motion picture. It was incredibly audacious and bodacious of John Patrick Shanley to write it and want to turn it into a movie. And if you could, I felt as though if you could fit a movie around this moment in this thing, you'll have something that is as unique as anything that's ever been put on celluloid. We came close.
Yeah.
But that was the reason I did that movie, for that one scene all by itself. Everything leading up to that and everything after that.
Yeah. It's a movie that also, at least in visually, it's the most curious of all your movies. It's the furthest away from conventional movie making, I think, that you've ever gone.
Oh, yeah.
It was just the look of the movie, that weird fake volcano and the raft made of stuff, and the opening scene where Tom is employed in a factory that makes products largely dealing with the anus.
American Panoscope Corporation, it's called.
And just the guys coming to work in the morning is one of the funniest, maddest scenes I've ever seen in a movie.
There's also a scene in that where I come out of the doctor's office after he tells Joe Banks that he has a brain cloud, and they're just standing there, and this lady is walking his huge Great Dane, and I just stop her and I look at the dog and I end up hugging the dog. But it's a long shot, and I'm just literally like I'm clinging to the life of this dog so much. I actually thought that was a brilliant moment too, the one that I didn't quite understand that much, but nonetheless.
Well,
unfortunately we have no clip,
movie. But if you ever see it on television, at least watch 80 minutes.
It's pretty wacky, yeah.
But League of Their Own in its way. That's a wild character for you, isn't it?
Well,
this veteran, tobacco-chewing baseball manager.
The secret of that, I thought, when once I was reunited with Penny, was that he was only 30. I was 36 when we made that movie. It was 4 years ago. I was 36, and I said, "Look." It was written as a 50-year-old washed-up, thing. And when I was talking to Penny, and we were doing that feeling each other out thing, even though now we were good friends, I was still feeling her out. And I said, "Well, do you think that I could play this role the way you want me to?" And she says, "Yeah, I think you can do it. Yeah." And I said, well, because here's the thing, you know, I'm only 36. I don't want to come in and like try to play like I'm 50. He says, no, you can be how old are you? You'll be how old you are. That's how old you are. That's how you are. And I said, because, you know, that's kind of, that raises the stakes here a little bit, because, you know, this guy now should still be playing ball. His best days aren't behind him. He should be enjoying the best days of his career right now.
That's a brilliant insight, because at 36, most ball players are washed up.
Yes,
it was during
right.
the war, and a lot of 36-year-old players
Exactly.
could have gone,
That's
did
right.
go
Right.
on.
Right.
But
he should have been then at the tail end, perhaps, playing out the last season or two of what was a brilliant career. And he had blown out his knee for Randy. He was now an alcoholic, and he was now fallen down so far that he couldn't go off and fight the war. So I actually thought that here was a very sad figure of a person that everyone would be able to relate to a little bit better than just the classic cigar-chomping, you know, fat, you know, 50-year-old guy who hates these women.
okay, here's the scene from A League of Their Own.
Go. What was great about that was Biddy Schramm, who is Evelyn, the girl that I'm yelling at there, is such a sweet, gentle soul. She cried in rehearsals. She cried at the run through the camera block. She cried every time I yelled at her. It was such a well-written. You just couldn't go wrong with that. It was so much fun to do. It was great.
And wouldn't you say, I mean, you know, based on what you've done before, you've never really done anything quite like that.
No,
you'd played depressed, and you'd played a little pissed off, and you'd played confused and all, but you'd never played rage that I can remember before that.
I had never played a man with a history. That's what I thought when I did this. I had never played a man who had a past. I always played guys who were going through the defining moment in their lives. I had never been a character who had something go on back in the back that was all ephemeral. It wasn't part of what the movie was, and yet it was the core of who the character was. So this actually is, I think, the first time I ever played a man in a motion picture. Up until that point, I thought I played some sort of growing, extended adolescence, Peter Pan syndrome, 1980s kind of, I don't want to commit to a relationship kind of guy. And this was the first time I think I played, you know, actually a human being of my generation.
Yeah, because it's actually true. I mean, what he's bringing to it is the inappropriate history of his career to something that's sort of like it, but really isn't.
I have the slave camera here. It's kind of like that thing that Johnny Carson has. You know, he could always just kind of go like that. And then Steve Allen.
The next clip we're going to play is, you know, is in a way, a more conventional movie. That's Sleepless in Seattle.
What clip is this, man? I don't remember. Shouldn't I know? I had to.
It's the New Year's Eve scene.
Oh, okay.
This movie is really a movie about movies, don't you think? I mean, in the sense that it is a movie that comments on certain conventions of...
Did you talk to Nora about this?
No.
Because this is exactly the way, this is what she said to me when we had, just before the Beverly Hills Hotel was torn down for renovation or closed up for renovation, we sat there, and this is exactly what she said.
Oh, really?
This is a movie about how movies portray us living our lives, or something to that effect. But this was literally about movies' effect on us and how we want our lives to be like movies. And when they actually do kind of like resemble a movie, you know what we say? Geez, it was just like a movie, you know? Isn't that great? You know?
I suppose the scene we're going to play is sort of like that in a way, in that it has kind of a wish-fulfilling aspect, but it's a scene that's really about this man who is still suffering from the loss of his wife and the need to try and keep some kind of a life going in this emptiness. So let's just look at that and talk about it a little after. That was an extremely effective movie.
And it's so simple. It is a very, very simple movie. The complexity of it is in the juxtaposition in the screenplay. This was one of the first times well, not one of the first times, but the screenplay was so overpoweringly great. It was like, how come nobody ever thought of this idea before? I mean, it was so easy. Of course, well, ding a bang a boom, well, that's it, and bang, you got the movie. And yet no one ever cracked that safe.
Well, it is an interesting movie in that the people that we usually know in the first reel are born to come together, never even know each other. I mean, the only movie that's even roughly like it is that Lelouch movie where the two people...
Claude Lelouch.
Yeah, there's a movie like his where the two people do not meet until their suitcases are on the same plane and they come down, but we see them with their lives moving closer and closer together.
It's the kind of storyline that would just drive studio executives nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
What, we're gonna make Ryan and Tom Hanks in the same movie? They don't meet? Are you nuts? Come on, there's gotta be a way. Can you bring them up to page 60? They can meet on page 60. How about that? Page 60, that'll work. Come on, we can't do this. This is crazy. Everybody's gonna be sitting there saying, come on, come on, come on, come on. And the movie is,
But,
great.
I mean, isn't that really the essence of romance, isn't it?
Oh,
It's denied
Lord.
gratification. I mean,
when you're an actor and you meet with the director, and Nora also did the huge rewrite of Jeffrey Archer's script, and all we do is talk about, our own parts.
Yeah,
we
right.
don't talk about the movie. Here's what I think my part means, Nora. She had all this, she had great, always great stuff. And I said, well, look, this is about, no, that's all very nice and good, Nora, but here, if I do this, I'm playing the guy's physiological process of grieving. That's what this guy's going through. This is not a guy who wants to get laid or meet the girl of his dreams. This is a guy getting over the death of his wife. That's what this is. And Nora said, okay. And then we fought like cats and dogs from then on.
but you were right. I think we're going to move to a picture that you said something so quite wonderful about it in an interview that I can't help but quote it. It was Philadelphia and the seriousness of that movie and all that. And you said, some interviewer, he said, prior to the pictures coming out, he said, in fact, I'm going to bring my relentless likability to this part. And
that nice juggernaut.
yeah, the juggernaut of nice. But I think there is something to the fact that you were willing to commit to this movie that made this movie possible. That is to say, here was trustworthy Tom Hanks doing a part that at that moment at least, was radical for a leading player to do, and I suppose concerning to some people. I know the studio. It wasn't that long ago. Even I can remember how anxious the studio was as that studio came online, and yet you didn't seem to me to have the slightest problem about committing to it. I don't know what problems there were about playing it.
None about. I couldn't believe that they were actually going to make the movie. This is the type of film that, if you make it for $7 million, it's kind of understandable, and you release it in a few theaters in Los Angeles and New York and the Twin Cities and Toronto and Chicago, and it might make half of its money back, and But here was a film that they were coming at. It was a major studio. It was like a $30 million movie, and Jonathan was going to be making it. It was a big undertaking, and the subject matter had never been touched in such a mainstream way. Jonathan wanted to make a movie that dealt with homosexuality, homosexuals in America, and AIDS in America that would, in fact, play the local cineplexes, that would be able to stand toe-to-toe with mass marketing motion pictures that star like Stallone and Schwarzenegger and the like, and draw an audience. That's one of the reasons why he approached me to be in it. That's one of the reasons Bruce Springsteen does the not the title song, but one of the songs. That's why it's populated with his usual cast of his repertory company. He sent it to me after we had chatted about it briefly and asked if, what role was I interested in. And I said, oh, Andy, without question, Andy. Because I felt, even on paper, that I knew who Andy was. It didn't matter that he was gay and I'm not. It didn't matter that he from Philadelphia or he's a lawyer and I'm an actor. I read through that and I just saw this guy is so much like me that I think I'm perfect to play.
What are your points of reference really with him?
Well, he says things in there. He says things about a sense of fair play. Mm-hmm. He also talks about the idea of there is a shadow life that goes along with it. He's not openly gay at the law firm. There are secrets that we all sort of like keep to ourselves, not because we're ashamed of them, just because it helps us deal with the realities of our daily life. I have those. They're different from Andy's, but I still have those sort of secrets. I also like the fact that he was going to be, in a lot of ways, the first homosexual man that big chunks of the audience would know was a homosexual, meaning that they live in a town or they live in a city or they live in a part of the city and they honestly don't think they come across gay people. Never mind that they own their liquor stores and they work at the bank, they're all over the place, but nonetheless in their mind, mm-hmm. they do have yet to honestly meet a gay person because they haven't been to the Village in New York City or they've never been to San Francisco. Right. That's their mindset. And here I was going to be perhaps the first gay man they ever knew, that they ever met through the movies. And I come from a great family. I have a good job. I was a decent human being. And I had my wife, Antonio Banderas, and I had been together for 11 years. I liked the fact that it was as much a piece of relatively common Americana as I have come to represent.
The scene we're playing is a scene where the character Tom plays is suing his law firm for unlawful dismissal because they've discovered that he's a gay man. And this is a scene of his testimony in court.
That courtroom was filled with people who were suffering from AIDS. And in the course of the movie, I think we had 153 people who was either in a scene or worked on the film that had AIDS, and I think all but a handful are dead now.
Right. Is that, I mean, I don't want to sound coldly, to play a person chronically ill, and ill in this particularly vividly tragic way, is that, as an actor, extraordinarily difficult, or is it actually not as hard as it seems? Or how do you relate to, not to gayness, to illness of that profound a nature?
It beats you up in your real life to actually do it. You know, I talked to so many people who had AIDS and asked the most bold-faced of questions, like a bad journalist, you know. Mm-hmm. What were you doing when you found out you had AIDS? What were your feelings when you got the news officially? How do you think you got it? That was actually, it was such a prescribed way of preparing for the role that it kind of made that part of it easy. Mm-hmm. Well, geez, there's just so much I need to know. So it was really just conversations. The difficult part was at the end of the day, when, sorry. You'd be working day in and day out with so many people around you that you know are kind of like checking you out because they've got it, mm-hmm. you know. Yeah. And when you would go home, I'd go home. We were staying in Philadelphia and in a condominium there in Rittenhouse Plaza. And at that time, my youngest child was only 2 years old. And man, to go back and, you know, here's this little boy and he's playing cowboys and Indians, you know. He's literally got a cowboy hat on. It's like, oh, this is too much of a Hallmark moment here. Mm-hmm. But Dad has come home with his shaved head and he only weighs 160 pounds now. And all he wanted to do was play cowboys and Indians. Right. It put things in a perspective that was, you know, not quite the same as, say, with Turner and Hooch. What can I tell you? Sorry.
It's okay. Forrest Gump is, in a certain way, as far from that as you can get. except that he is a man in his strange way involved in the very not just one of the crises of our times, but as it turns out, about half dozen of them.
And it ends in 1985, so we've
Right. So at least
we missed out on
some things.
We missed out on that whole OJ thing.
Yeah. Is Forrest Gump in some ways kin to the Kid and Big? I mean, in
Lord, yes.
And in what ways is he not kin to him?
Well, he is kin to him in his confusion. There's just so many. I always said this thing about Forrest was that he can only operate at the speed of his own common sense. He cannot rationalize. He can only do what he is told, or do what God says he's supposed to do, or do the things that his mama said he should always do. And other than that, that's his only template for living. All the rest of it, he has to be able to process through his own experience of what is this moment like? Is this moment like anything I've ever gone through before? And if it's not, then he doesn't know what to do and he stands stock still. Or he falls back on what he's been told to do. That's how he's kin to the boy in Big. How he is not like the boy in Big is that he is on his own. He doesn't get to go back home. And I think the reason why I think the movie entered into so many people's personal consciousness. The national consciousness is another thing. That's dictated by Time magazine and, what people thought about our revisionist vision of the 60s and, the computer technology of how did you talk to John F. Kennedy? But personally, I think that what Forrest figured out how to do by the time the movie comes to an end is combat his own loneliness. I think the reason why the end of the movie is so... You cry. When I was reading the script, I cried when Mama died. I cried when Jenny died. I cried when he was. I cried 5 times in the last 20 pages of reading the script, because there is a moment there when there is no recourse left for Forrest, and we know, having seen the movie, that he is now going to be alone. And because we have so much invested in him and we are projecting so much of ourselves onto him, that loneliness becomes our loneliness too. And it is not till at the end of the movie, where if you haven't seen Forrest Gump, he has a little boy, that we realize that it's incredibly hopeful that Forrest has in fact survived. Therefore, we have survived because he has somebody else that is going to keep him engaged, and he has a family that is going to be just as nurturing to him as he is going to be able to nurture it. And therefore, he beats the loneliness rap. And in that respect, Josh has a much easier time because he just gets to go back to his house.
Here is that scene where we see Forrest Gump coming up to the moment where he beats the rap. I once did a television program about George Cukor, the famous director of the Golden Age, and he said that the business of movies, and he's talking real commercial movies, is to penetrate the reality that lies beneath conventions. That's particularly the task he thought of actors, meaning that, however kind of corny maybe a scene is or whatever it is, what the actor brings to it is the human reality, whatever his reality is, that, makes that real. It makes it transcend the sentiment of it or the fact that we may have seen a dozen scenes like it before, or that it is a convention of some kind of movie. And I think, what we look at when we look at a career like yours is a career that, has taken all kinds of movies that are, in a certain sense, conventional movies. Some of them have a gimmick like Big or Forrest Gump, but some don't. But that the trick is to kind of get to this essential human reality, no matter how outrageous or movie-ish or what have you the movie is. I don't know, it's not a question. I think that's what you do. I think that's what you are doing. Do you think that's what you're doing?
I'll be damned, Richard.
You understand I meant that as a compliment.
Yes, I do. Hey, well, anything that's got good George Cukor in it, that's going to be a compliment. We have to go and bust it. You know, we have to tell the truth under the most fake of circumstances. Spencer Tracy said that. I remember actually hearing that when I was in college or something like that. An actor's job is to hit the marks and tell the truth.
Jimmy Cagney used to say that, too.
They must have got together at the Friars Club.
He used to say, plant your feet and tell the truth.
Plant your feet and tell the truth.
Right.
This is something that I did not learn until I had been doing this for a while. But once I learned it...
What did you think you were doing if you weren't doing that? Because it seems to me like you were doing
I thought I was fooling people. You know, I thought, there's a degree of smoke and mirrors that you can escape with your lines.
Oh, really? When a camera's this close to you, you thought you could get away with that,
I thought
did
you could. I thought, hey, they bought their tickets, regardless. But there's no substitute for it. And I don't know exactly when I sort of fell on that, but movies are such fake enterprises. I mean, even the scene we just saw, the circumstances that surrounded that should have precluded us from being able to do something that I think is as emotionally, raw as that scene still is for me, as a matter of fact. We had, right prior to that, we had been in Vietnam, a car ride away, shooting a scene where Forrest, crawls into a tunnel under Lieutenant Dan's orders, and I stripped off my battle fatigues, jumped in a car, drove over to the big oak tree, and Bob Zemeckis and I were in my dressing trailer, and he was saying, "So, all right, what do you think of this?" And there was Eric Roth had written a big, long, kind of rambling thing that had stuff in it about life is a road, and sometimes you sit by it and it goes on, and you don't know where it leads to and where it comes. And it was all kind of good, but there wasn't a particular thing in there that we thought had matched up to an awful lot of the stuff that we did. So me and Bob just sat there and kind of like batted stuff back and forth about each other, about our own lives and about what's going on in Forrest Gump. And the end result was this. And we came up with that probably 45 minutes before we went out and shot this thing. And we shot it in an hour and 15 minutes as the sun was going down. And we only had maybe 7 passes at the whole thing for all of our setups. But what is up there now is verbatim what we came up with 45 minutes prior. And what we had to do was trust our own knowledge of what the truth was for Forrest Gump. And that what we then had to excise from what was there was the stuff that was smoke and mirrors and what was fake. There was stuff in that speech that Forrest wouldn't say.
But this is then, I take it this is quite near the end of the film that you shot.
Yes, it is. I think
so.
There's
By
only
this
one scene
time, you
after
two
this.
had lived with this and given to Forrest Gump, and I think this is kind of an important point about movies. A truth comes out of the process of making the movie if the actor and the director are paying attention to it that may quite logically be not the truth. The writer who a year or 2 years before and not living with it in the same textural way couldn't approach anyway. And so this is a kind of form of planting your feet and telling the current existential truth as you understand it at this point in the process.
In theory, it can all work really great.
Yeah.
But in practice, when you're out there actually doing the battle brick by brick of making the movie, you come up against moments where you say, hey, this can't be. This simply cannot be. He can't talk like this, and he can't know this. And that happened so many times on Forrest Gump that we lost count. There were so many times we were standing up in front of something. Wait, whoa. No. That's not going to work. You know why? Because Forrest Gump, he went through that, and then, oh my God, you're absolutely right. Give me a piece of paper, somebody. That's the way Bob talks. And then we would force him. But we were so armed with understanding and trusting each other as far as the movie that we were making that we believed each other when the other person said, you can't do that.
This is the end of your career, as far as I'm concerned, for this evening as an actor. And and now we're going to talk about you as a director. I know.
Okay,
but
sorry, folks. Hey, the price of baseball goes down. It's extra innings.
It's only 1 o'clock.
It's only 1 o'clock in the morning.
That thing that you do is something that I think you have not done as an actor. That is to say, it's an ensemble piece. It's about an ensemble piece about an ensemble, for Pete's sake. I take it something that, since it's about the rock culture, I think rock maybe was more glamorous for you as a kid growing up than the movies. I think you've hinted at that. Maybe that's what was coming over the TV, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan or something. Seemed to you more glamorous than what, Charlton Heston, perhaps? or
Handily, yes.
Or more within your range, perhaps?
Yes, indeed. The Beatles meant more to us than Kirk Douglas. There's no question about it.
What sent you to this? What sent you to writing this script and then wanting to direct it? What clicked in your head to say, well, it's time to look back on my boyhood dreams? Because it's not your boyhood. You didn't grow up in Erie, and you didn't play in a band, so far as I know. And
it was an idea that I could see in my head very, very clearly. And when the time came that I honestly needed to be doing something else, because I was in an unhealthful atmosphere of actually touring the country promoting that Forrest Gump, which was great in June, but by the time December and January came around, it became a very narcissistic and unhealthy position to be in.
Really?
Well, yeah, it's like you're campaigning for your movie, and you're having to ask questions like, is the world's revolution going to tilt if you win a second Oscar for this? And I said, look, it's just a movie that I'm proud of. That's the only reason I'm here. And by the way, I wouldn't mind having that second Oscar. I'm not going to turn it down if they'll give it to me. You throw yourself into this pit of I'm going to try to write this thing. I've never written a screenplay before, but I've worked on screenplays and with screenplays, and I have people that I trust will tell me I have my head up my butt if it doesn't work very well. So the ensemble aspect of it came almost directly from my time on the bus with the Great Lakes Theater Festival, in which it is from outward appearances, it looks like everybody loves each other and has a great time, but as soon as you're on that bus for 15 minutes, you realize there are some people here who are not talking to one another, that it's a loose confederation of a creative alliance. But likewise goes, it was also have forever been fascinated by this very narrow frame of time of 1964, when I was the youngest kid in the house. Everybody else was teenagers, and the argument always seemed to be is who's better, the Beatles or the next band that appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. Is it the Dave Clark Five? Is it the Rolling Stones? Is it Freddie and the Dreamers? Not too many people voted for Freddie and the Dreamers. But I was convinced that the Dave Clark Five was way better than the Beatles, because there were 5 of them, and I was 8, and I just wanted to be different from everybody else anyway. But the music still is very vibrant and lively for me now. I think my musical taste seized up right about the White Album. I don't think I've really listened to much since. The Go-Go's had a couple of good albums there in the 80s. And then I like the Pretenders and Springsteen, that double blast of Sherry Darlin and the Ties That Bind on the River. That's a pretty good couple of cuts. But I like music with the beat. And there was also this concept, the idea of the serendipity of the change of drummers. Serendipity is, I bow down before a god of serendipity. Thank God I wasn't cast in that play back in Sacramento. Otherwise, I wouldn't be where I am today. Thank goodness the Shakespeare Festival's company wasn't big enough to completely cast Taming of the Shrew. And this idea of a change of drummers because one breaks his arm, is that in fact the catalyst that makes the destiny for this band happen? And to me, that is just as vibrant an examination of the human condition as any other movie that I've been able to make.
The one thing I noticed about this is that the part you wrote for yourself, or I don't know if you wrote for yourself or at least decided you could play. We're not going to see that part tonight, folks, but anyway, he's a kind of a mean guy. He's a kind of maybe not mean, but he's awful awful realistic to these
Pragmatic.
kids. Yeah.
They don't let me put on sunglasses and just kind of like hang in the background for a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I did specifically. I was writing this thinking that I would play the man, and I wanted him to smile with his face, but not with his eyes. I wanted him to be a mysterious man of questionable motives that we honestly don't know. Is he a benevolent dictator or just a dictator?
I can't imagine how you could imagine such a fellow living in show business where we do not encounter persons of this type.
I'm not saying it's not based on a string of representatives who worked for me. I've met a couple of guys like this occasionally, and
it's shocking to hear things like that.
there is a bottom line mentality that will use you when you're good and will use you up when you're done.
But what we're going to see is the up moment from the movie. It's the moment at which this little band in Erie, Pennsylvania, has the first glimmering that their little garage tune may go out into the world further than their garage. Well, I'm not going to try and top that, and I don't know why you should. It's a terrific scene in a really lovely movie, and probably got a whole second career going.
Well, it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck still.
Really?
So, and I've seen it 1,800 times, so it works out okay.
I just take it, I asked you this before, but Spartacus is a highly personal reference, is it not?
You bet. Spartacus was one of those movies that you sought out and tried to see when you were 11 years old. There was just something about Spartacus.
And even though
I am Spartacus, it was like that good.
Even though it was Kirk Douglas.
Even though it was Kirk Douglas. But man, he was a good-looking guy in Spartacus, man.
And
Tony Curtis, too.
So, yeah.
I'm Spartacus.
And so now you feel Spartacusian.
Yes, I do.
This.
Unfortunately, that is now the first. No, that's the second reference to Spartacus. We had to cut some other references to Spartacus in the movie,
but
he is Spartacus.
There's a couple, 2, 3 things in it.
We are obliged, because it's now 2 in the morning, to go to some questions. Stick a hand up somewhere, somebody. There's one.
And we have no clip. Man, I have so few words of advice as a director, other than change your shoes at lunchtime, because your feet get really tired, and it helps you get through the rest of the afternoon.
It helps to be a
I
prominent actor.
no, I don't mean to be flip towards your answer, but I was able to become a director from the safest of all positions. I was a movie star the studio didn't want to piss off. So I got to go and say, I'd like to direct this movie. And they said, yeah, okay, Tom, we'd love you to direct the movie. We want you to have a long and fruitful relationship with the studio, so let's have it begin with this movie of yours you want to direct. I think there is no substitute for perseverance, and I think anytime you get an opportunity to create something that is honestly some sort of visual translation of either something that's in your head or is on a piece of paper, you must leap at that opportunity, no matter how mundane or trivial it may be, because that is where you will develop everything that will become your style. I can't see any hands, so anybody else?
In that gentleman.
Guy in Yankee hat in back.
Yeah.
That I have worked with, or in life as we know it? My favorite actor of all time is Robert Duvall. He has been ever since I saw a movie called The Rain People that was one of Coppola's early works, and then just a week or so later was watching To Kill a Mockingbird and realized he was the guy playing Boo Radley all those years. From that moment on, I was just on his creative bus, and I'd still pay money just to see him walk across the street. My favorite actress is Sophia Loren, for reasons that are obvious to any. Yes. I've turned down some great movies that have gone off and been very, very successful, but I don't regret turning them down because I quite simply didn't get them, and therefore they would not have been the same films as they turned out to be. It used to be I never ever said the movies that I turned down because it was just too painful. But now the statute of limitations has run out of that. I actually told on the phone Phil Alden Robinson that the book Shoeless Joe would never be able to be turned into a film because there's no way a movie could capture the magic of the short story. Well, the movie was filmed as Shoeless Joe and it was released under the title Field of Dreams. So I guess I was proved at that moment to have my little head up my little butt. I think that was when I was still riding the wave of megalomaniacal madness after having made big. Yes, there's a hand.
Do you think agents in Hollywood tend to keep material from their actors that they represent their clients for their own purposes?
Oh no! It's almost impossible to explain how this works. But every myth that might have been communicated, or everything you think is true about how agents operate, are really not true. An actor forges his own decisions. An agent will not keep a script. It's impossible for him to keep a script from an actor. If you're at my level, I have conversations with people all the time. They just meet me and say, hey, I've got a script, and I say, well, send it to my agent or send it to me, and I know about it. When you're at a lesser level and you're trying to get work, an agent will kill for you to see a script and read a script and like a script and get the job because he makes money off of that. Agents are not nearly as powerful in getting an actor a job as they are powerful after the actor gets a job and they negotiate the deal. That's really what they do. They negotiate the deal to get you more money, to get them more money, to drive up the cost of filmmaking, to make it impossible to get it. I'm being facetious, but as far as the getting of a job goes, that really is almost totally in the actor's hands, either by getting the audition and winning the audition. Way over there, yes?
Whoops.
Sorry.
Of your body of work, what was the biggest surprise for you? Whether you thought this was going to fly critically and you got something success and maybe didn't, or vice versa, you weren't sure it was going to hit and
Well, it's hard to say the biggest surprise because they're almost always a surprise. Very rarely do you see the movie and say, well, this is it. This movie is going to make $127 million. There's no question about it. I would say of late, what surprised us all very much was Apollo 13 being as successful as it was commercially, simply because everybody knew the ending. We didn't know if, hey, they lived. Jim Lovell is at the press junket, for crying out loud, so obviously he made it back okay. We didn't know if they would actually be able to withstand that foreknowledge and also the amount of technical lingo that we were throwing at them in lieu of kind of like fake dramatic moments from the flight. Yes.
One over here.
Who is one of the greatest directors you've worked with and why?
Well, Bob Zemeckis is the most thoroughly. I mean, he is possessed by the movies that he makes, and he works himself and you and the crew into the ground in the course of making the movie. But it's never from a position of not knowing what he wants. A lot of times you'll work with directors and you'll waste a good chunk of the day just trying to figure out how to do it and where to, and then eventually you kind of figure it out, and then you got to go back and make some changes from other stuff that you did just because they finally figured it out at 11 o'clock in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. Bob Zemeckis knows exactly what he's doing. You show up there, the camera is there, the shot is ready. You don't even have to rehearse it sometimes. You've just got to figure out how to say the lines. And there's a joke about Bob Zemeckis movies that all you do is remove the slates. The slates are the little clacker things at the beginning of every scene. You just cut that out of the film and the movie is cut and it's released like that. You put it in post and it's done. Because that's how thorough he has thought about every single one of those shots. He's amazing, and I don't know how he does that. There's other, Penny Marshall is the direct antithesis of that. Penny, I always said, Penny, this is movie making by attrition. You're just trying to wear us down. Well, I don't know what I'm going to want, so I need to hear, I want to come here, and I was here. Here's a quick story, and by the time I made League of Their Own, I knew this, so I knew, I know how Penny works. The girls on the team didn't. So there's one long scene in the movie in which the girls are all sitting in the dugout talking about ways they can attract more people to the games, and Madonna says, what if my bosoms pop out of my blouse? And everybody has a line, and I was supposed to be in that entire scene. And on paper, it was 7 pages long. Now, let's see, 7 pages long in a Penny Marshall film, that will be 14 and a half days of shooting. The same scene over and over again. I have a line at the beginning and a line at the end. So when we were rehearsing it for the first time, all right, ready, and Tom, you're back then, girls, yeah, ready, action, Tom. I came out and I said something like, well, it looks like a great day for baseball. And then I walked out of the dugout. And she said, well, how come why'd you leave? Where are you going? I said, Penny, I'm the manager. I'm taking the lineup to the umpire at home plate. Oh, all right. And I got out of 2 weeks of the most mundane film shooting. I played ball. I read books. I learned how to knit. I sent faxes back and forth. I wrote a computer program. Then I showed up after 14 days of shooting to walk in at the very end of the scene saying, all right, girls, come on. There's dozens of people waiting for us to play baseball. And then I sat down in my place, and I think I only had to do that once. So there wasn't a hilarious story about directing techniques. But so every one of them has a very different way of shooting and filming and talking and communicating to you. And they're all worthwhile. It's just a matter of what the end result is going to be. Yes, way up there.
I was just wondering, now that you were director, how was your relationship with the cinematographer? That's your first experience with that, and him being in the business as long as he has and the experience he has. I was just wondering how your relationship was it difficult for you to transition, being in front of the camera, now being behind, and knowing how the camera angles were going to affect it?
Yeah. At the very beginning of the filmmaking process on That Thing You Do, I threw myself on the mercy of Tak Fujimoto, Victor Kempster, our production designer, and Richard Chu, who was the film editor, because I said, I don't know what to say to you guys. I've just been an actor and all this kind of stuff. I don't know the language. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to you. I don't know how to start this relationship off. With the actors, I was prepared because I was going to go in and say, look, all you have to do is come in with an idea and we'll go from there. Just, if you don't know your lines, know what you want to say instead of the lines and we'll figure it out. But just come in and go. You can't go wrong. You won't be punished. So come in. Come on. Let's go. Anything you want to do. But with Tak, for example, Tak would talk to me about film stocks, and I said, "Look, I don't know anything about film stocks, Tak. Whatever you want to do. Well, what kind of look do you want for the movie? Do you want a cold look or do you want a warm look?" And I would say a cold look, Tak. A cold look. I'd like it to look cold. And then he would say, "You want it to be a cold look?" I said, "No, I'd rather have it a warm look, Tak." A warm look. Once we started having these kind of inane conversations, it would turn into something where we could actually find some sort of common ground. Now, for example, the scene that you just saw, this is one of the first times, and Tak and I did talk about this. This was our shooting philosophy. That scene is one of the first times the camera moves in an obvious kind of manner. Because I wanted the look of Erie, Pennsylvania, when the band is still in Erie, to be a static place. I wanted the changes in the visual narrative to come just from different cuts. We had a lot of cuts, but they're all static shots, as you might notice, so that when these kids hear their song on the radio for the first time, that's when we lay the dolly track. That's when we're moving down the street at 20 miles an hour. That's when we got a handheld camera that's whipping around inside the store. So that movement will translate into the kids' excitement. We were able to have those conversations periodically with Tak Fujimoto and myself, but more often than not, I was just saying, boy, Tak, what's next? Because I mean, I'm not going to argue with the man, and I'm also not going to tell him to do something that is contrary to what he thinks is the best way in order to shoot a scene. I had ideas that he shot for me, and it's in retrospect, it's not surprising how few of them are actually in. The vast majority of what you see is because Tak Fujimoto knows so much about what he's doing.
Maybe we'll take there's one guy down here who's been kind of patient. You've been up first, I think. Well, or speak in unison. Yeah.
Is the movie's gain live theater's loss?
You're speaking personally?
And towards me, man, I don't think so. The chops that it requires to be a truly great stage actor is a hugely artistic enterprise, and I honestly think the only thing the theater lost was a loud actor. I just think I would have been very, very loud. Although I could have then had the distinction of playing myself in Big, the musical, which might have been a nice gig.
You could be closing day after tomorrow.
I could be closing a day after tomorrow.
I would like to just say, and maybe I spent a lot of time watching acting in movies, and
it's your job, Richard.
yeah. But somebody's got
to do it. Who wouldn't? It's a pretty good gig, actually.
It's a good gig because I love actors and I love acting, and because it is truly something I cannot do. And what there's this sort of theater, versus movies, and theater's loss and movies gain. But I think the kind of acting that Tom does, and this is my little essay on the subject, is a kind of American acting. And it looks very simple, and it looks like it comes from someplace very simple. And I suppose it does, but the trick about it is always what you're stripping away from it to get down to that simplicity. And I think really, truly great movie actors, and you named a couple of them, Spencer Tracy, Cary Grant, so forth, Jimmy Stewart, are in touch with that simple, basic thing. And they're also in touch with something else, which is very important to be in touch with, which is to be in touch with your sense of anger and rage and, not sucking up to the audience. One of the things as I went through your material is it's so easy. Comedians really do want to be loved, and I suppose comic actors want to be loved a little bit too. And one of the things I like about Tom's work is the integrity of his playing and his not only finding the simplicity, but not particularly asking us to love him. Maybe he just knows he's a lovable or even likable guy. Anyway, I think we have to end on that.
Thank you. Sorry it went so late, everybody. Thank you.